straight to questions.
Yeah.
You appear in The Australian today, talking
Yes.
about various things about brand opportunities.
Yes.
One of the points, and I suppose I'm paraphrasing slightly,
Yeah.
is suggesting that Australia is lacking strategies was the key phrase when it comes to non-traditional
Okay, the
media.
lead of the story, I read it and my heart dropped because that's not at all what we said. So I'm really glad you're bringing that up. I think, the point that I was trying to make, and this is in general, that we're meeting with brands today to really help them think through their strategy. It's not that people aren't smart and they're not strategic. I think what was interesting, again, when I've met with different folks here, is people are super smart. They're absolutely thinking about things the right way. They just need other examples and inspiration. And so my charge, again, it goes back to thinking about ways to design programs that have business impact. I hate meeting with brands and asking them what their goals are, and they tell me engagement. Engagement doesn't mean anything. You've got, at some point, the CEO is going to look at what you're doing. And so you've got to figure out a way to show how you are moving the business needle. And so that's more the core of the conversations that we're having. But I thank you for bringing that up because lots of brilliant Australians.
And do you find, obviously, you get to see different markets as you do this role. Are there different levels of sophistication in different markets when it comes to social media?
Absolutely, definitely. And I think it goes back to sort of, you have to think about resources, right? And where brands are building out teams and the kind of support that they're giving them. And so that's a big part of it. In some cases, we have markets that just in the last year have exploded in users. And so they're still trying to figure out, the behaviors and the patterns that I talked about. So that's a lot of it. So yeah, definitely. But I think what's again interesting is that so much of the world is sort of in the same place. Of our 200 million active users, 70% of them are outside the United States. And so, for us, when we look at global audiences, it's encouraging, frankly. There's an efficiency there for us when we see those universal themes and trends.
If Twitter is a place where stories start first and people aren't already talking about your story, will buying a promoted trend help?
Yeah, absolutely. Absolutely. We knew that when the Vine Android story dropped, that was going to be a huge moment on Twitter. And so we actually had a lot of the telco companies coming to us and saying, how can we own that? And Samsung, it's sort of like who rings the bell first? That's how you get the trend. And so they really built for that moment. We talk about real time all the time, and I mentioned this in the story. The best brands are planning ahead for it. So what I mean by that is, there's a pet food company that every morning sees a spike in pets, in conversation about that, because people are walking them and they're feeding them before they leave the office for the day. And so the strategy that they're developing is a content strategy that sort of supports the context of that conversation, makes sense within that conversation. So you think about trends and sort of predicting the moments. We also see brands use trends to create brand moments. And so Porsche, launching a new car, did the 2012 Porsche 911, and they celebrated the history of the 911 and how epic this car is, and they had all this great video of people at the race car track and different generations talking about the 911, and people wanted to watch, they wanted to click. 83% of the people who saw the trend that day clicked because the content was great. And we saw people retweet it, and eventually they came back to the brand with brand's own message. So yeah, it's just thinking about what kind of campfire or water cooler you want to start.
Hi, I'm Jeffrey from realestate.com.au, based out of Melbourne.
Yeah.
My question is very direct. In our business of 600 or so really creative people, will you come and present to our business?
Well, thank you. I'm flattered. Part of the reason why I don't know where I am and what time zone I'm in is because we're traveling around the world right now, meeting with as many people as possible. And so these events are great because we get to talk to a lot of folks, and it scales and all of that. So I'd love to do that, but we really there's even though there were around 2,000 people right now at Twitter, you look at how we're growing, and it's really great. The acceleration that we're seeing right now on the platform and our users around the world is so strong. I'm the first person signing up for hologram technology as soon as we make that happen, because it'll just make life easier. But thank you.
Facebook's thought to have about 10 to 12 million users in Australia. Can you talk a little bit about your plans for the Australian market and how you'd like to see Twitter grow in Australia?
Yeah, definitely. So, part of the reason why I'm here is because when we look at what's going on with the user numbers and the acceleration that we're seeing and sort of the savviness and sophistication of the market, it's a good place for brands to really start to do big things. So just know that just by me being in this country, great opportunity as it is, it's because of what we're seeing. When we look at market development around the world, what we have found is that there are a couple of key things that help us unlock markets and really bring new users onto the platform. One is media integration, right? So think about the news stories and how Twitter tweets are now serving as quotes, and we're seeing stories sort of really break on the platform. So we work with the newspapers and the broadcast networks and all of that to sort of embed Twitter into the story, so that you get people used to seeing tweets and then actually wanting to see what it's about. We also know when the roar of the crowd is building, and to be part of that, that can be really compelling. And so sporting events, huge for us. So we're World Cup and huge events like that, but also, I know last night was a big game between Crimson and Blue, and that was a big moment, right? And so how do you then support that and build that up even further and allow people to connect to other fans in the big moments in games? So sports are huge. Influencers. So, for example, when we saw the Pope join Twitter, we actually saw a spike in users in Latin America countries, because all of a sudden, this huge Catholic population got to get closer to the Pope. And so, you think about political leaders, the fact that you have an election in September, those kinds of things help Twitter. We want to support that because, again, when events happen in the world, they happen on Twitter. And so to make those events richer and allow more people to participate and give them added layers of that experience, that helps them have a valuable experience on the platform and hopefully, keeps them coming back.
Is there a risk in promoting a tweet when you can predict how the context may change in real time?
I'm gonna answer that question slightly differently. I would say that when you think about promoting a tweet, conceivably, it could go any kind of way. You don't know how people are going to respond. I think where we see marketers and brands be really successful is, again, when they're creating content that fits within the context of a conversation. So a mistake that we see brands make sometimes is they approach Twitter like you would display advertising, and they hit people with something super promotional that doesn't make sense within the context of the conversation, and people feel like they're getting an ad. And that's a missed opportunity more than anything else. And I'm not saying that you shouldn't hit people with promotional content. Subway, they'll spend 80% of the time talking about health, fitness, nutrition, these broader topics that people love to talk about. But then around lunchtime, they'll probably remind people where you can get a deal on a great sandwich because people are thinking about where they're going to go get lunch that day. So it's just balancing that and being mindful about what people want to hear. Great content makes great ads. Bad content, bad ads.
The CEO of Myer, Bernie Brooks, had a bit of a Twitter gaffe recently. Not a Twitter gaffe, but he said something that a lot of people on Twitter hated, caused a huge surge in unpopularity. Mm-hmm. His solution seemed to be to apologise on Facebook, and then the whole issue died on Twitter about a day and a half, 2 days later.
Yeah.
So to you, what's the best way to handle this sort of thing? Is it just to apologise and then go silent, or is it to actually actively engage? Or does that just prolong the whole conversation?
It really depends on the situation and what you've done. And sort of, what you really think. Like, sometimes, you got to get brands comfortable and people comfortable with saying things that not everyone's going to like. And so one of the things that we do when we first meet with brands is help them understand what's the baseline of sentiment right now for your brand. Get comfortable with it, because guess what? There are probably going to be some people out there who don't like you. They might talk about it. The opportunity for you is to shift that sentiment, right? Create mechanisms that drive positive conversation. So there's that. And second thing is, if you feel like you've said the right thing, stick to your guns. Be authentic, be yourself, and be comfortable with that. Rupert Murdoch, great example of a CEO who says whatever he wants to say, and often there's grammar mistakes and misspellings and all, the whole bag with it. But he's himself, and that means that when he says something, he means it, and that, I think, that means something. But sometimes you also say things that they don't come out the right way, or you've offended people and you've rethought it, and maybe not the right way to handle it. So a simple apology can often sort of quiet it and just be genuine in that. But often when you're looking at an issue on Twitter, there are a couple of considerations that we tell people to look at. The first is you want to check momentum. Is the issue growing? Is there more people talking about it? Is it building? If it's going that way, then you're probably going to want to think about, how you engage there. You also look at influencers. If influencers enter the conversation, that sometimes is a sign that you should get more involved because they've got a lot of power, a lot of influence, right? And then you look at the audience that's talking about it. Are those the most important people to you when you look at the community having that conversation? Sometimes they're not your target audience. They're not the influencers that you're communicating with. And so you can let them have their conversation. So there's just a lot of considerations. With crisis and issues, there are ways to sort of look at it and assess, but you never want to just sort of do a pat answer because it's different depending on the situation.